They thought Earth was dead, buried beneath centuries of silence and forgotten rebellions. But when a cry for help pierced the void, one word, one whisper, it ignited a storm. And now across the galaxy, a reckoning is coming, led not by armies, but by survivors, by ghosts turned warriors. And in the eye of this thunder stands one name, Riven. The sky above Zarion was forever golden, a peaceful gold, soft and warm, deceptive in its stillness. For centuries, the planet had been a quiet outpost in the Empire's farthest reach, a place no one cared about, not even its conquerors, but beneath its glowing clouds and gentle breezes, something darker simmered the cries of 1,000 enslaved species. They had whispered of Earth like it was a ghost. The humans will come, they said in hushed voices beaten and bruised. One day they will come. The elders told stories even though stories were forbidden. Stories of a species born in chaos, raised in struggle, and forged in fire. A species that didn't kneel, that didn't forget, and most dangerously didn't forgive. But Earth had fallen silent long ago. No ships, no messages, no hope. That was what the Threx Dominion believed. They laughed at the legends. They called humans extinct or worse, insignificant. Earth was left alone, not out of respect, but because no one expected a dead dog to bite back. On the edge of Sector 94, in the ruins of what used to be a freedom colony, Riven, half Zarian, half human, lay chained in the dust, his back split open from the lash. He had tried to protect a young girl who'd dropped her ration sphere. For that, the Overseer had whipped him until the dust turned red. He spat, blood eyes flickering with something deeper than pain. A pulse. A memory. His mother's voice, if they ever break you. Riven, you remember who you are. You are my son, and my father was human. He never knew Earth. He barely believed in it. But at that moment, staring up at the twin suns of Zarion, something stirred, and far away beyond the shattered wormholes and the rusted galactic lanes, Earth heard it too. They didn't hear words, they felt the silence, the kind of silence that screams, for Earth had not forgotten its own. Not those stolen, not those enslaved, not those hidden in systems ruled by tyranny. When the signal reached the high orbital command in Luna's base, it was barely a whisper, a broken frequency piggybacked on an old mining drone, but the moment it translated, every general in the room stood still. One word: help. Within days, Earth mobilized. It wasn't diplomacy, it wasn't a press release, it was thunder. Massive dreadnoughts roared from the dark side of the moon. Combat pods were loaded by hands that remembered loss. Pilots who had seen friends gunned down by Dominion patrols. Soldiers who were raised on stories of the fallen colonies. They wore no flags, just armor black as midnight with a single symbol etched into their shoulders. A red hand clenched. Meanwhile on Zarion, the Overseer laughed as he dragged Riven's limp body toward the pit. "No one's coming for you," he hissed. "Your people died with their pride." Riven didn't respond. He didn't need to, because above them the golden sky cracked, a ripple like glass shattering across the heavens. Then came the sound, not a scream, not a boom, but the deafening roar of gravity being torn apart. And then they descended, like thunder. Black pods streaked through the atmosphere, lighting up the sky like a divine storm. Anti-air batteries fired wildly, unprepared, too slow, too arrogant. The first pod landed in the courtyard of the labor camps, crushing a Threx guard beneath it. Then it opened, and the first human Riven had ever seen stepped out. Tall, broad, eyes burning with rage that had crossed galaxies. He didn't speak. He didn't pose. He raised his rifle and started firing. Riven, still bleeding, started to cry, not from pain, but something he hadn't felt in years. Hope smoke filled the air as more pods slammed into the ground, tearing through the camp's fortified barriers like paper. Sirens wailed, a sound no one had heard on Zarion in years. The Dominion never expected an attack here. Why would they? They had ruled unchallenged for centuries. The human soldier who'd landed first moved like death given shape, precision, rage, mercy, only where it was deserved. He pulled Riven up from the blood-soaked dust without hesitation, slinging him over his shoulder like he weighed nothing. Riven tried to speak, but the man only said one thing in a voice low and hard as steel. "You're safe now, brother." The word brother hit harder than any explosion. It didn't matter that Riven looked half alien. It didn't matter that he wasn't born on Earth. To this soldier, he was one of them. The camp exploded into chaos. Prisoners screamed and scattered, unsure whether this was salvation or the end of the world. Dominion enforcers fired wildly, panicked, their discipline shattering in the face of something they didn't understand. Because the Threx had never fought humans before. Not like this. One of the guards, a four-armed brute with a shock spear, charged the human soldier from behind. Without turning, the man drew a sidearm and fired backward. The shot punched a hole straight through the guard's skull. Another pod slammed down nearby, doors hissing open. A woman in dark red armor stepped out, scanning the battlefield. Her voice crackled through the comms. Alpha Team, confirm. Extraction, civilian rescue is in progress. Priority, human blood detainees. Engage all hostile Dominion forces. No survivors. Riven was handed off to a medic unit. Humans too, in light armor, their hands gentle but quick. They wrapped his wounds, injected something cold into his veins, and moved on like a perfect machine. All around him, prisoners were being herded into safe zones, not just humans or half-bloods. Every species, anyone, the Dominion had tortured or enslaved. The humans weren't just here for their own. They were here for everyone. Who are they? Riven croaked, struggling to sit up. One of the medics paused and gave him a small smile. Earth's shadow, she said. The ones you call when hope runs out. Back in the command tower, Overseer Malrex watched the monitors in disbelief. He gripped the edge of the console, claws shaking. This isn't possible, he hissed. Earth was contained, forgotten, his aid. A pale-skinned Osari trembled. Their tech is decades ahead of projections, sir. They're jamming our long-range comms. They've hit 3 other camps simultaneously. Shut up, Malrex roared. He turned to the window, eyes narrowing, as drop pods continued to fall, like meteors. They won't stop, he muttered. They won't stop until we're dust. He was right. Across Zerion, it wasn't a battle, it was a purge. Dominion weapons were ineffective against human armor. Their vehicles were hacked, mid-flight, crashing into their own bases. A single human squad could outmaneuver an entire Dominion platoon. And when they captured the first Threx commander, they didn't negotiate. They broadcast his confession, forced or not, across the sector. We enslaved the children of Earth. We beat them, broke them, buried them. We thought they were gone, but they came back, and they brought hell with them. That transmission spread like wildfire to planets still under Dominion control. It was a whisper of revolution. To Earth's enemies, it was a warning. And to every human blood descendant scattered across the stars, it was the beginning of something greater. Riven sat wrapped in a rescue blanket, watching the sky as the golden clouds still glowed above. But now, through the gold, he saw fire. Warships, fighters, humanity is in full force. The humans didn't come because they had to. They came because someone cried for help. And Earth answers cries with thunder. The golden skies of Zerion were no longer serene. Fires raged across the horizon, streaked with smoke trails from falling Dominion crafts. It wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was retribution. Riven watched the sky from the med transport as it sped toward a temporary evac base. His wounds burned, but his mind burned hotter, with questions, with anger, with something he hadn't dared feel in years. Purpose. The human camp was nothing like the prison he had known. It wasn't luxurious, it was efficient, mobile and heavily armed. It didn't smell like metal and blood. It smelled like oil, sweat, and life. Riven stepped off the transport with a borrowed exosuit, keeping his broken ribs from shifting. A young officer met him at the ramp. She was barely older than him, with eyes like flints. Riven, son of Terran, half Zerion, confirmed human lineage. You're coming with me. He followed without question. They passed rows of wounded Dominion guards, bound and silenced. No torture, no revenge, killings. The humans weren't here to make a statement. They were here to finish something that had started long ago. You were listed as deceased in the Lost Colony's archive, the officer said as they walked. Your mother, a known resistance fighter. Your father, Zerion, a slave miner, was executed for defiance. You shouldn't be alive. I'm not sure I am, Riven muttered. She stopped in front of a large black tent. You are now. Command wants to see you. Inside it was dark and humming with hollow maps and encrypted screens. A tall man stood at the center, arms crossed behind his back. He turned slowly, and Riven felt an unfamiliar sensation crawl up his spine. Respect, fear, awe. This man looked carved from war. Gray streaked his beard. Scars lined his face like a map of battles past. Riven, he said, voice calm but filled with something heavy. I'm General Royce, General Thorn. Welcome home, home. Riven scoffed. I've never even seen Earth. General Thorn didn't flinch. You don't need to. Earth isn't just a planet, it's a bloodline, a memory, a promise. Riven blinked, his throat tightening. Why now? Why after all these years? Why come back? General Thorne stepped closer because the galaxy thought we were dead, because they took our children, because you cried out. I didn't send that signal, you didn't have to. Someone did. That's enough. General Thorne turned to a screen showing real-time footage of battles across Zarion. We're taking this planet back, not just for humans. For every species the Dominion crushed under its boot. This isn't a mission, it's a reckoning. Riven stared at the images. Ships falling, soldiers pushing forward. Slaves cheered through fences as their captors were driven out. He saw himself in those faces. Every scar he carried, every bruise, every time he thought he was nothing. Maybe he wasn't. Why me? He asked quietly. I'm not a soldier, not yet, General Thorne said, but you will be. That night, Riven didn't sleep. The painkillers dulled his body, but his mind raced. He sat outside the command tent, staring at the stars, wondering which one was Earth, wondering what it was like to grow up free. He heard footsteps. The female officer from earlier sat down beside him. Name's Sarah, she said. Squad leader, 3rd, Echo Division. He nodded slowly. Riven, you fought back, she said. Not many do. I didn't win. You're still alive, that counts. They sat in silence for a while. Then she added almost softly, tomorrow we hit the Citadel. That's where they keep the archives, the records, the breeding logs, the proof. They tried to erase us from history. We're going to take it back. Riven clenched his fists. At dawn, the humans moved like shadows across the scorched land. The Citadel loomed in the distance, black, angular, and towering, a monument to Dominion pride. It had stood untouched for generations, its walls holding not just command centers and weapons stockpiles, but something far more dangerous. Truth Riven stood among the strike team, armored in a matte black exosuit too fresh to feel like his own. It adjusted to his body, automatically wrapping around his healing wounds like a second skin. The HUD blinked to life, highlighting targets, terrain, and friendly units. It was terrifyingly precise. Sarah handed him a rifle. You won't need to fire it probably, but keep it ready. I've never shot anything before, he admitted. She raised an eyebrow. That's all right. The first time you do, you'll know exactly why you had to. The dropship ride to the outskirts of the Citadel was silent. Everyone inside looked calm. Too calm. Riven could hear his own breath under the helmet, ragged and sharp. Sarah leaned in close and said, We're ghosts, Riven. They don't see us until it's too late. When the dropship landed, it didn't make a sound. Human tech didn't scream when it arrived. It whispered, it promised. The Citadel's outer defenses were already down, disabled by advanced hacker teams who'd infiltrated the grid hours before. No alarms, no defense turrets online, no reinforcements are coming. Still, Riven expected resistance. Instead, they walked into a dead city. The inside of the Citadel was pristine, untouched by the chaos outside. Halls lined with banners of the Threx Dominion walls, engraved with the names of fallen heroes, slavers, killers, tyrants. The humans moved through it with grim efficiency, downloading archives, tagging data cores, and disabling power grids. Every action is calculated, no wasted time, no unnecessary cruelty. Riven found himself alone in a chamber, marked classified, bio-lineage storage. The doors hissed open for him before anyone could stop him. Inside, cold blue lights illuminated rows upon rows of cylindrical chambers, hundreds of them. Cryopods, some empty, some still occupied and attached to each. Names, species, genetic records, breeding logs. He moved closer, heart-pounding reading labels. Subject, 4321, half-Terran, conceived in mining. Colony 13, resistance lineage, confirmed, status, incompatible, rejected, discarded, killed. His stomach turned. These weren't records, they were trophies, Riven. Sarah's voice rang through the comms. Fall back. We've got inbound armor, 3 Dominion tanks, west corridor, we need backup. He turned and ran, rifle tight in his grip. His legs screamed, still weak from recovery, but adrenaline carried him faster than he'd moved in his life. When he arrived, Sarah's squad was pinned behind fallen pillars. The tanks were Threx-class siege walkers, heavy-plated dual cannons glowing. Riven didn't think. He remembered how it felt to be chained, how his mother's screams echoed as they dragged her away, how the overseer laughed as they whipped him, how no one came. Until now, He ducked low, spotting a fallen Dominion rocket launcher near a crushed guard. He sprinted into the open. "Sarah," shouted Riven. "No, too late." He slid across the floor, grabbed the launcher, and rolled behind a slab of debris. His HUD locked onto the nearest tank, screaming warnings into his ears. But his hands moved on instinct. Click target lock. Boom. The launcher kicked hard, the missile streaking through the smoke. It struck dead center. The tank exploded in a fiery bloom, throwing molten debris into the air. Riven gasped, ears ringing, vision swimming, but he didn't stop. He reloaded, fired again. A second tank went up, this one spinning sideways before crumpling to the floor in a heap of twisted metal. The third turned its guns toward him. He stared at death. He didn't flinch. Just before it fired, 2 precision shots rang out from above. Sniper fire. Human units had taken the upper levels. The final tank collapsed with a metallic groan, its cannons. Never firing, silence fell. Sarah rushed over, gripping his shoulder. "That was insane," she said breathlessly. He coughed, smoke in his lungs. Wasn't going to let them take anyone else. She stared at him differently now. Not like a rescued victim, not even like a soldier, but like one of them. "Get used to this feeling," she said. What feeling? Fighting back and winning. And in that moment, with flames lighting the citadel behind him and the taste of gunpowder in his mouth, Riven finally understood what it meant to be human. The citadel burned behind them, its once pristine walls now cracked and charred. Dominion flags fluttered weakly in the wind, stained with soot and ash. The truth buried deep in its vaults, data logs, breeding records, and prisoner manifests was now in human hands. But more than that, it was in Riven's hands. He'd seen it with his own eyes, the proof. The numbers, the brutality disguised as bureaucracy. Back at the mobile base, Riven sat alone inside the debriefing tent, still gripping the scorched handle of the rocket launcher. They let him keep, a symbol, they said, a memory. He wasn't sure if it was supposed to feel like pride or weight. Sarah walked in her armor stained and scratched, but her face unreadable. She dropped into the seat across from him. "You made the kill log," she said. 2 tanks. That's more than some veterans. "I don't feel like a hero," Riven said quietly. "You're not one," she replied flatly. "You're a survivor. Heroes die, survivors fight." He nodded slowly, that he could understand. General Thorne arrived moments later. No salute, no formalities. Just that quiet, powerful presence of a man who carried wars on his shoulders like they were birthmarks. "We decoded most of the Citadel's archive," he said. "They've been targeting human blood hybrids specifically, not just enslaving them, erasing them." Riven already knew. He didn't need the files, General Thorne continued. "They think our bloodline is dangerous, too unstable, too unpredictable. What they don't realize, what they never understood, is that it's those very things that make us unbreakable." Riven looked up at him, voice hollow. "So what now? We expose them. We hit them. Do we go back, General?" Thorne leaned in, eyes sharp. "There's no going back. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a declaration." He tapped a control pad, bringing up a hologram of the galaxy. Dots lit up in red across a dozen systems. "These are confirmed Dominion slave planets, labor camps, human blood detention facilities, and generational testing centers. We're going to hit every one of them." Sarai whistled low. "That's half the outer belt, correct?" General Thorne said. "And when we're done, there won't be a single place in the stars where they'll feel safe." Riven swallowed hard. "And me." "You're not just a survivor anymore," Riven the General said. "You're the spark that lit this fire. You don't get to walk away." For the first time in his life, Riven didn't want to. That night, a broadcast went out across the sector, encrypted raw, and meant to be seen by the oppressed, not the powerful. A short message with Riven's face, front and center. "My name is Riven. I was born in chains. My mother was executed for fighting back. My father died nameless in the mines. The Dominion thought I would break that. I'd disappear like the rest. But they forgot one thing." He looked directly into the lens. His eyes weren't afraid anymore. "I'm human, and we never stay down." The signal cut after 10 seconds. That was all it needed, on worlds hundreds of light years away. Slaves paused their work. Beaten species whispered to each other through fences, and in the Dominion's high chambers, the message repeated on every hacked screen. Not a threat, a promise. The stars had changed. Word of the uprising on Zerion spread like plasma through circuitry. Fast, searing, impossible to contain. The Threx Dominion scrambled to patch their systems, bury the breach, and spin the narrative. But it was too late. The fire was lit, and it wasn't burning quietly. In the prison world of Gorinth 7, enslaved workers refused to rise from their cots. On Mercia Prime, a riot broke out after someone painted the words, "We are human. We are thunder" across the gates of the central processing plant. It was spreading like rebellion always did, not in speeches or banners, but in whispers and blood. Riven stood in the hangar of the Vigilant Rain Earth's flagship carrier, now orbiting above Xerion. It was a floating fortress, all black steel and humming grav cores, bristling with weapons that could punch holes in moons. But it wasn't the firepower that shook him. It was the order, the rhythm, the way everyone moved like they were born to be here, like this was home. He didn't speak much, not after the broadcast. Sarah said it was normal. You just sent half the galaxy into revolt. You're allowed to be overwhelmed. I didn't mean to become a symbol, he told her. No one ever does, she replied. His days now blurred together, training drills, combat simulations, debriefs, tactical meetings. Varen insisted Riven be part of the planning sessions. Not as a figurehead. As a strategist, he understood the enemy from inside the cage. His mind, sharpened by years of survival, began to see weaknesses in the Dominion that even Earth's generals had missed. They build everything for control, he told the War Council, even their architecture. One central core, everything radiates out. You hit the heart and the limbs die. You're talking about centralized failure points, one of the commanders noted. Riven nodded. The Dominion doesn't understand redundancy. They never needed it. No one's ever pushed them far enough to matter. Until now. Varen said, a rare smile creeping into his voice. The next target was already selected. Nyros Delta is a mid-tier Dominion outpost with a vast hybrid experimentation center. Unlike Xerion, it was fortified, armed to the teeth the Dominion had learned. They expected thunder this time, and that's exactly what Earth brought. Riven dropped into the atmosphere of Nyros Delta inside a newer pod this time. Sleeker, faster. His name was stenciled on the side in crimson letters. The team with him wasn't just Sarah and Echo Division anymore. It was his squad now, multi-species survivors, fighters who believed not just in Earth, but in Riven. They called themselves the Shattered Line, because every one of them had come from bloodlines the Dominion tried to erase. They hit Draxus hard, not with subtlety, with rage. While other teams disabled comm towers and supply chains, Riven's squad punched through the medical sector room by room. What they saw was worse than anything on Xerion. Children in test tanks, their features shifting between human and alien, bodies torn apart and rebuilt. Names are replaced by numbers. Riven didn't cry. He remembered. He tore through the guards like a storm, not because he was stronger, but because he had nothing left to lose. He shot until his rifle overheated, then picked up a Dominion blade and carved his way through the labs until the walls were red. Sarah found him in the center of the main chamber, breathing hard, covered in blood. Not all of it is his. It's done, she said quietly. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the nearest data console, cracked it open, and began uploading everything. Proof images, logs straight to the EarthNet. He looked over his shoulder and said, "We're not saving them anymore." Sarah tilted her head. "Then what are we doing? We're avenging them." The message went out again, and this time it wasn't a whisper of hope. It was a scream of rage. The war wasn't quiet anymore. It roared after Nyros Delta fell. The Dominion tried to deny it. They broadcast faked images called the Rebellion, an internal disturbance, and blamed it on rogue mercenaries. But their lies couldn't cover the truth. Pouring through the cracks, images of broken labs of freed prisoners of Dominion elites begging for mercy while flames licked at their fortresses. And at the center of it all was Riven. He never asked for it, never wanted it, but everywhere he went, people looked at him like he was more than flesh, more than scars. He was a story they could follow, a fire they could believe in. The Shattered Line became a legend overnight. Riven, Sarah, and their squad didn't just liberate. They exposed every world they touched was another crack in the Dominion's mask. But legends came with a cost. On the third moon of Xerath 99, during a rescue op. Gone sideways, they lost Elos, a half-human, half-Vaesen with eyes like polished gold, and a laugh that made you forget the war. A sniper round took him through the chest before he could say a word. Riven held him as he bled out, hands trembling, whispering, you're okay, knowing damn well. He wasn't, Elos smiled, blood on his lips. At least I died free. Then he was gone. They buried him in the black sand of Epsiron, No flag, just a simple stone carved with the words "Born in Chains, Died Breaking Them." Sarah sat beside Riven after the service, neither of them speaking for a long time. Finally, she said, "You blame yourself, I gave the order," he muttered, and he chose to follow it. Riven stared at the grave. "We're not soldiers, Sarah. We're ghosts with guns." She looked at him hard. "Then we haunt the hell out of them." The next mission was personal. They found the overseer from Zarion Malrex, the one who'd whipped Riven bloody, who laughed as others suffered. He hadn't been killed in the initial siege. He'd fled hidden in a luxury estate on a protected Dominion planet called Vealora Prime High Class, rich full of parties and silence. The kind of place that never smelled like war. Until now, Riven didn't take a squad this time. Just Sarah, no orders, no briefings, just 2 soldiers and a name that needed to be erased. They dropped into Veltrax at night, no warning, no mercy. The estate was surrounded by synthetic gardens and drones designed to keep discomfort away, but comfort was no defense against vengeance. Riven stormed through the halls, taking down guards with silent shots. Not for efficiency, but because he wanted Malrex to hear it coming. He wanted that bastard to know he wasn't safe anymore. They found him hiding behind a wall of servants, trembling in a silk robe, like the coward he was. "You can't do this," he stammered, voice quivering. "I'm a high-ranking official. There are laws." Riven leveled his rifle. "Your laws died with the first child you branded." He didn't pull the trigger, not yet. Instead, he turned on his helmet cam and streamed the moment across EarthNet. "Let the galaxy see him." Riven stepped closer. "Say my name." Malrex blinked. "What?" "Say it, Riven," he muttered. Riven lowered the rifle. "Good." Then he pulled a small device from his belt and activated it, a signal flare. Moments later, a human strike ship screamed through the sky above, pinpointing his position and sending a single rail round through the roof. It didn't hit Riven, it hit Malrex. What was left of the Overseer wouldn't need burying. Sarah looked at him. Why didn't you shoot? Riven's jaw was tight, because he didn't deserve to die in silence. When they returned to the Vigilant Rain, no one asked questions, no one needed to. Riven wasn't the scared half-blood boy in chains anymore. He was the thunder, and thunder was getting louder. The galaxy was no longer silent. Riven stood at the edge of the command deck aboard the Vigilant Rain, staring out at the vast sweep of stars. He no longer looked like the beaten half-blood slave dragged through dust and chains. His armor gleamed in black and red. His voice carried in rooms that once ignored his kind, his name. Riven echoed across systems, sometimes in reverence, sometimes in fear. Behind him, the War Council debated strategy for the final assault. Their target is the Dominion Core, world of Carnaxis Core. Varnaxis wasn't like the outposts they had crushed. It wasn't a slave planet or a remote lab. It was the Dominion's pride, the jewel of their empire, the seat of their rulers, and it was untouched. No one had ever attacked it. No one had ever dared until now. Fleets assembled, Sarah said, walking up beside him. 10 carriers, 16 dreadnoughts, 4,000 strike pods. Every species we liberated sent fighters, even the ones who swore neutrality. They're not fighting for Earth, Riven said quietly. They're fighting for themselves, Sarah smiled, and for you. He turned eyes heavy. Don't say that. You don't have to like being a symbol, she said, but you can't run from it. You were the first spark. You gave us thunder. Let it roll, Riven. He closed his eyes for a long breath, the kind of breath you take before everything changes. Then he said, let's finish this. The fleet moved like an eclipse, blotting out light, swallowing transmissions, swallowing hope. Carnaxis Core shimmered below a planet of polished glass towers. Planetary defense rings and orbital cannons, big enough to carve moons in half-Dominion warships, formed a tight shield wall above the planet's atmosphere. A final line that had never been breached. They waited, but Earth didn't wait anymore. Riven led the charge. His pod fired from the Vigilant Rain in a silent blaze. Hundreds more followed. Ghost black, silent death in every direction. The Dominion's defense grid screamed awake, launching countermeasures, but they were too late. Human AIs jammed their systems before their targeting locks could be completed. Riven's pod burst through the upper atmosphere, trailing fire. Below him, the capital spire of Varnaxis gleamed, a 200-story palace throne room at the peak housing the 13 sovereigns of the Dominion. His target. Our blood built that tower, he thought. Let it fall with us watching the pod smashed into the central plaza, crushing marble and gold. Riven stepped out, rifle in hand. breathing fire. The Sovereign Guard met them with plasma halberds and high-frequency shields. For a moment, it was chaos. Bodies slammed against stone gunfire, punched holes through towers, and screams. Gods, the screams rattled the air like music made of vengeance. Riven fought like he had nothing left to lose, because in a way he didn't. Every blow he struck felt like payment. Every kill a name he couldn't remember from the prisons and labs. Beside him, Sarah moved with lethal grace, two short blades tearing through armored guards like paper. She took a cut across the leg but didn't slow down. Not even for a second. Forward Riven shouted, "We take the tower now!" The shattered line pressed upward, level by level. At the 75th floor, they found a child, half human, shaking behind a glass wall. Eyes swollen from weeping, the Dominion had kept them as trophies, proof of control. Riven broke the glass himself, lifting the child into his arms. "You're safe," he whispered. "You're going home." "Where's home?" the child asked. Riven didn't answer. At the top of the tower, the Sibrans waited in ceremonial armor backs, straight eyes cold. One stepped forward, tall and silver-scaled, sovereign, Narix, High Chancellor of the Threx. "So, this is what you bring," he sneered. "A mongrel army and fire. Earth is still a primitive dirt rock, hiding behind myths and guns." Riven stepped forward, lowering his rifle. "No," he said. "Earth is memory, and memory doesn't die." "Did you come to the end of the Dominion?" "Sovereign," Narix laughed. "You've ended nothing. You've simply made us angry." Riven pulled a small device from his belt, a data crystal. He inserted it into the Spire's mainframe. Within seconds, the entire planetary broadcast system flickered to life, showing footage from every liberated world. Labs executions, children in chains, the truth uncensored, unavoidable, playing across every screen in the Dominion's empire. "You ended yourselves," Riven said. A roar came from below. Millions of freed slaves rioted in the streets. The tower shook as Dominion soldiers were overwhelmed not by firepower, but by numbers, by rage, by history that refused to be buried. Sovereign. Narix lunged, too slow. Riven met him in the center of the throne room. Fists first, he dropped his rifle. He didn't want a clean kill. He wanted it personal. The Sovereign struck him with a plasma dagger, slicing his shoulder. Riven drove a knee into his gut, then slammed him to the floor again and again and again, until the white of his robe turned black. He stood over the body chest, heaving. Sarah limped to his side, blood streaking her face. "It's done." "No," Riven said, barely breathing. "It started." They didn't declare victory. There was no flag to raise, no anthem to play. Instead, they opened the gates. The tower was emptied floor by floor, and prisoners and records were released. The palace of slavers turned into a temple of truth, and then they burned it to the ground. The fire could be seen from orbit a week later. Riven stood aboard the Vigilant Rain once more. Clean bandages wrapped his side. The medals they tried to give him, he refused. They sat in a drawer untouched. He watched new ships being constructed in the hangars. Ships are not marked with Earth's colors, but with the new emblem. A broken chain, ringed in stars. Varen joined him, older, slower, but smiling for once. "We're not an empire," the general said. "We're a warning," Riven nodded. "Good. We could use a leader, someone who understands what this fight really means." Riven looked at him. "I'm no politician." "No," Varen agreed. "You're something better. You're the reason they'll never forget." Riven didn't answer. He turned back to the stars. Somewhere out there, more still suffered. More waited. More whispered stories about a thunder that once came for them. He would make sure it kept coming, because the truth was simple. Humanity wasn't perfect. It wasn't pure. But it remembered. It answered calls no one else would. And when it descended, it came like a storm. Not for conquest. Not for conquest, but for reckoning. As the wreckage of Carnax's core cooled and the last fires dimmed, Riven stood not as a soldier, but as a signal. Across galaxies, his name wasn't just spoken. It was invoked. On every scarred world once ruled by chains, statues began to rise. Not of conquest, but of defiance. Children born in silence learned his story in whispers. Elders who survived the camps told tales of the thunder that answered Riven never sought to lead. But legends don't choose themselves. They are chosen by the scars they carry. And when the next world calls because it will, he'll be ready. Not as a hero, but as a human. And that the stars had learned is what they should fear most.